Firstly, Ben, congratulations on winning the Wainwright Prize for writing on global conservation.
Thank you very much, Charlotte. Thank you. Still slightly surreal, as you can probably imagine. Always feels like it's something someone else wins, but yeah, delighted, really pleased.
Were you surprised?
Yes. I mean, as I said, winning is always something that, it's for Robert Macfarlane or all of these famous established writers. I never thought I'd be privileged to win something like that with my first book. I was humbled by the feedback the book's got over the last year and a half, the Twitter pickup, the popular pickup, the grassroots pickup, and the critical pickup. But of course, 6 judges sitting in a room deliberating over so many, worthy texts and so many, fantastic books. I wasn't holding my breath, but no, I'm genuinely quite amazed and quite delighted.
What difference do you hope that the fuss and the publicity around winning the prize will make for the book?
I think we started off, myself and Nigel at Pelagic, as an unknown author and a very professional but relatively small academic publisher. And I think we've gone on this journey and we've been sort of working it out on the way of, how do you actually get books about conservation out of that rather sort of obscure, textbook world and into the shelves of W.H. Smith and Waterstones, because I think the messages in this book are not just about birds. They're not small picture, they're big picture. They affect everybody: farmers, gamekeepers, landowners, the public, the economy. And, I'm just keen that as possible, but that it moves out of that specialist audience and into the wider audience. Obviously Wilding has had, an extraordinary impact, and it's an extraordinary book. And I don't expect it to do as well as Wilding. I think that would be pretty much impossible. But for it to be read by a wider audience, I think would be quite exciting.
It's a very readable book. It doesn't read like a textbook at all. Were you very conscious of that when you were writing it?
I was, and especially when you're tackling things as complex as bird memory, natal homing, the food chain, the size of a habitat. You're consciously and you're continually aware that you could bore the pants off your readers very quickly. So what I tried to do was to use humor and anecdote and first-person experience, and to try and conjure what it really is to be a little swallow, migrating from Africa to your barn in England, and to try and take the edge off the science. But at the same time, we wanted this to be an absolutely rigorous scientific book. So it was a constant sort of treading the line between not being lightweight, and I think we've used over 400 scientific papers in the course of writing this book, but also to keep it relatable, to the people whose starlings and house sparrows and swallows are vanishing each year, so that everybody can relate to the stories that they're being told.
As you say, this is your first book. What made you want to write this book at this time?
I think coming back to the UK, after having seen so many other countries, particularly in Eastern Europe, in Mongolia, in the United States, in Alaska, in Canada, where different elements of the landscape are in such better condition than they are here, realizing what we're missing. And I think that's the key thing that led me to write this book, is an extraordinary sense of robbery, that my generation are being robbed of what is rightfully theirs. And, the swallow clouds of Romania, the amazing river deltas of Poland, the extraordinary farmed upland landscapes of northern Spain, and when you see all this and you come back to the UK, there is an extraordinary sense of being bereft. And I thought, I've seen enough examples in other countries to know that it doesn't have to be this way. And I thought, why not write a book that says how things could be, rather than just saying how bad the current situation is, though of course you have to start with that before you get to the good bits. I think everyone goes on a journey from despair to hope reading the book. I get a lot of people on Twitter saying to me, that they're on the verge of breaking down in tears halfway through, and I have to kind of cheer them up and say, keep reading to the end.
You don't just talk about birds, you don't just talk about wildlife, you also talk a lot about rural communities.
I think you will. I think you have to. And I think, there's this enormous myth that rural communities in this country are thriving. They're not. Many of them are dying out. Most of my family come from areas of Wales that are now ancestrally extraordinarily poor. Young people are leaving the land. Everyone is wedded to these harmful, intensive models of farming that aren't really doing anybody any good. And it doesn't have to be that way. And even hunting estates, for example, thrive far better as diversified, wilder uplands in other countries. So rural jobs are very important. And I think one of the great myths of rewilding is that it takes jobs away. But if you do it right, it does the opposite. It gives jobs back. And I think it's really important to realise that the economy is on the side of nature recovery, not, as we've seen in recent weeks, in somehow an opposition against it.
Having said that, there are a lot of ideas in this book which for some people will be difficult. There will be some raised blood pressures among your readers. Do you mind that? Do you mind the people who argue back with you on Twitter?
No, certainly not. I mean, it's quite interesting. When I wrote it, I would never have expected productive dialogues with sheep farmers such as James Rebanks. I wouldn't have expected productive dialogues with large with large hunting landowners. I wouldn't have expected so many dialogues with people who disagree with a little bit of what I have to say, but not all of it. So although I was expecting a sort of enormous backlash, I think because I don't write in a way that's antagonistic, and I don't attack people, and I don't deride people, and there are no sectors of society who I label as not worthwhile as people. I think that leads to far greater stakeholder engagement than if you just come out and say, all gamekeepers are, should be cleared off the land, or we don't need farmers, or any of these statements. Very easy to make, but once you've made them, very hard to go back on. So no, the dialogue has been, the dialogue was the reason I wrote the book to begin with, and it's been better than I could have imagined.
Do you enjoy it? Do you enjoy the fact that people are reacting to your book, although the book is sort of done and dusted and in a beautiful cover, but you're still getting people interacting with you about that?
Yes, yeah. I mean, the book is never finished. I mean, that's the nice thing about it, because it's got so many ideas. I mean, I had an email yesterday from somebody saying, let's actually put pelicans back in the Norfolk Broads. And I said, oh, okay, well, that's interesting. I was thinking we could do that in 20 years' time, but this guy wants to do it now. And I said, okay, well, we'll have to think about that. Do they have enough space? Do they have enough habitat? But these conversations are organic and ongoing and growing. And so in some ways, the book never really finishes. It just carries on.
You've written another one in conjunction with Nick Gates. It's called Orchard.
Yes.
So I'm guessing that the clue is in the title. Tell us a bit about it.
So Nick and I have been friends ever since we met on Springwatch 6 years ago. And when Nick moved to Bristol, I said, there's one place that you've absolutely got to see, and it's this fantastic traditional orchard in the heart of Herefordshire. We keep its identity secret because we think so many people would go there that the landowners would be overwhelmed. But it's somewhere in the heart of the Malvern Hills. And it really is like traveling back in time 50 years. It's this extraordinary sharing arrangement between people and farming and wildlife. It's an intensive production environment for apples, pears, cider, charcoal, livestock grazing, and yet at the same time it is this extraordinary wild wood full of fungi, lesser spotted woodpeckers, hedgehogs, cuckoos, spotted flycatchers, honeybees, hornets, all of these creatures vanishing from the wider countryside. And we thought, isn't the orchard a fantastic solution to all of these compromises that we have to make? So it's a much more homely book, I suppose. It's a much more local book, and it really is the diary of a year in just one orchard and all the extraordinary things that happened.
Did you go wassailing?
We didn't. I know.
Best thing to do in an orchard.
Controversial, but I have been invited, so I will go along. But no, I think orchards are great. They're a fantastic compromise, and it gets to the heart of all the perverse incentives in this country. We pay farmers to get rid of orchards, and yet orchards give us fruit. They sequester carbon. They cut down our carbon footprint by, bringing apples all the way from South Africa. They support livestock grazing. They support farmers, and they support wildlife. So we really hope in writing Orchard that we can get people to realise what fantastic habitats these are, farmed habitats, habitats with people and wildlife. And hopefully, come the next round of government funding, there can be a place for orchards to be subsidised and replanted.
It's an interesting time both for rebirding and for orchard, because the whole way we subsidise agriculture is completely changing starting next year. Were you very aware of that when you're writing these books?
Well, when I started writing Rebirding in earnest, it was just as Brexit had been announced. And Brexit is many things to many people, so I won't go too far into the politics, but one thing was clear: the way that we pay for the countryside would, and indeed will, change. So it struck me as being written at a time when we're at this juncture. We can carry on doing more of the same, or we can take a very different route, and we can start paying for genuine biodiversity gains, regenerative farming, and we could even pay for some areas potentially to be taken out of agricultural circulation, areas like the Somerset Levels prone to constant flooding, where we really are fighting climate change itself. Could we take at least a few areas out of unproductive agricultural circulation so that they become the Yellowstones of the future? Obviously, this is big, bold, ambitious thinking. It's a long way from anything you'll see in a current DEFRA policy. But unless you set it out and propose it, then it's never going to happen.
So who do you hope is reading Rebirding?
Well, I know that it's being read quite widely at DEFRA. I know it's being read by Natural England, and I know it's being read at the RSPB, which is more than I could ever have hoped for. But of course, it would be wonderful if Boris were to read it. I'm not saying he will. I'm saying it would be lovely if he did. And I think, I would hope that the environment ministers of the future would at least give it the time of day. Because, there are many myths out there that we need to turn every inch of our land into a factory in order to produce the food that we need. And of course, one of the things Rebirding sets out is that we have all the space in the world for nature recovery without compromising food production. And I think there are a number of other myths in the book that are exploded. And I think it would be great to be able to get that message into government if possible.
Finally, show us the prize, which of course, in this virtual existence that we now have, I haven't even seen. What do you get?
Well, so here we go.
Aha!
I get the world's best puffin prize. It's an absolutely amazing bit of artwork. Really extraordinary. So thank you very much, Wainwright Prize.